start with an introduction. My name's Jeremy Streten. I'm a legal practice director at Streten Mason Lawyers. And we're presenting this seminar about making 2016 the best year ever based on the introduction of our Business Legal Lifecycle. I've put into the chat box a Dropbox link. That link is to a Dropbox that contains the slides, a copy of the slides, and also a copy of the questionnaire that I'm going to go through at the end as part of our offer for joining today. Can people confirm that they can hear me, just to make sure that it's all good? Yep, excellent. All right, excellent. Thank you, everyone. I'll repost. Someone said that they can't see the slides. I'll repost the link to the Dropbox folder. There you go. If you can't get them, I can email them to you afterwards as well. All right, so here's a picture of the Streten Mason Lawyers team. Craig and I started Streten Mason Lawyers in 2011. We started and we act for special, small to medium-sized businesses. And in the last 4 years, we've grown from just the two of us to a team of 12 full-time equivalents, with 2 offices, one in Morningside in Brisbane and the other in Caboolture in Queensland. For anyone who's been to our website or seen our, or heard any of us talk about the Streten Mason Lawyers difference, we basically differentiate ourselves in 3 key points. The first one is certainty of pricing. So that's we give everyone a copy of a fee estimate, and we say this is a fixed fee for the work that we're going to do. So that provides everyone with certainty of pricing. We also provide a 7-step solution, so how we actually can help people to achieve their goal. And the third one is comprehensive advice. So we provide holistic advice for small to medium-sized businesses. And really, that's what this presentation is about, because that's something that we have grappled with for the last 3 years in business. How we knew what we did, we know how we act for businesses and the full service that we provide, but we didn't know how to explain that to our clients and our referral partners. And the answer to that is the Business Legal Lifecycle, which is what I'm here to introduce to everyone today. There's many different life cycles of businesses. There's the Adese life cycle that goes through from birth through to death of a business. But what we've done is we've done a lot of research into businesses that we've acted for over the many years that we've been in business. Over 5,000 clients that we've acted for, and we've sat down and worked out when businesses did things properly, when they did those things, and when they didn't do them properly, what they did wrong. We've found that there's measured points in a business where legal aspects should be thought through and considered. And that's what the Business Legal Lifecycle is about. It's about putting a structure to your business so that you know when you should be doing things in the business from a legal point of view. At the start of any business, it'd be great if you can do all of this at once. And we all know that when you start a business, you really are cash poor and time poor as well. And so that's one of the other things, that a lot of the time that people want to do everything to start everything off properly, and they just don't have time or money to do so. So this is about giving a structure to that. There's no set time frame on when these things should occur. So it's not like after 6 months after one step, another step should be taken. But the idea is to give a structure of when things should occur. And the other thing to remember is where you think you're at in the life cycle is probably a phase or 2 further along than you actually are. Most people will find that they think that they're at one phase, but really they haven't really addressed everything from a previous phase, and so they need to go back and actually do that phase again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the phases. I'm going to talk about what the phase is and some of the key legal considerations that you have to make in that phase. And as I said, please feel free to ask any questions as you're going. So the phase 1 is conception. So this is when you get the idea of the new business or product or service. And it's probably the most daunting phase out of all 13 phases of the Business Legal Lifecycle. And the reason for this is that you really have no idea whether or not the phase is going to be, or the product is going to be successful, or whether it's going to actually do anything that you want it to do, and whether people, more so, will pay you for it. So you need to work out in this phase whether or not there's a market for your product or your business. And also, capital is really scarce at this stage. It'd be great if people had a lot of money at the beginning of a business to start off with, but let's face it, most people don't. And so they really need to tighten their shoestrings and make sure that things happen properly. You also need to work out your initial team. So I'm not really talking about employees here. I'm talking about consultants. So you really need to look at really important consultants of accountants, financial planners, lawyers, business coaches, business mentors, people who you're going to be able to get advice from in relation to your business. And it's really crucial that you do it at this stage so that you set yourself up properly for the future. You also need at this stage to set some goals. So where do you want to be in business? What kind of business are you going for? Are you going for a lifestyle business where it will just pay you an income for the rest of your life, or is it one that's you're going to build into a big behemoth and sell to a third party investor? You also need in the conception phase to work out what you're going to call your product or service, and that's always a lot of fun for people to do. So once you're through the conception phase, you get into the startup phase. So this is the phase where you decide, okay, I've got my business, I've got my product or my service, and I'm going to take the plunge and I'm going to start the new business or market my new product or service. And really here we're talking about a few different things. We're talking about you might set up an entity, so that might be a company or a trust to actually own the business itself. You might sign a lease for a premises, so you might lease a premises to run your shop or your business from. You might also think about borrowing money. So borrowing money from a bank or a third party or a relative to pay some of those hefty startup costs that we all know that we go through when we start up a new business. And the fourth is you can also consider at this stage whether or not you want to be a franchisee. So what we've found in looking at all the companies that we've acted for is where they haven't gone through the conception phase properly, they really struggle in the startup phase. They lack direction, they don't know where they're going, and they really have some significant issues in getting through this phase because there's no set plan of what to do. It's also important to remember at this stage that you're supposed to be scared. You're taking the plunge, whether or not you've done it before or whether you're doing it for the first time. It's a scary prospect to start a new business or to launch a new product or a service. So it's all right to be scared, but managing that is how you'll make sure that you're successful. So one of the big things that we see people fail on in the startup phase is setting up the right entity. Now, I talked about that before, about you can have a company, you can have trusts, you can start up as a sole trader. But what's really important is that you don't just take barbecue advice on what entity is to set up. So if you take barbecue advice, what I'm talking about there is you go to a barbecue and you talk to your friend who set up a business and they say, just set up your business this way and you'll be fine. What that doesn't take into account is your personal circumstances and also not only personal circumstances, your goals, what you want to achieve in the future. So it's really important during the startup phase that you use the team that you've started in the conception phase to really give you the right advice to make sure that you can start up your business properly and avoid the pitfalls that so many people suffer from in their business. Other key considerations to think about are your current situation, your current structures, where do you see the product going, and also what current assets that you own, and also your personal financial and personal financial situation. So once you're through the initial clients phase, you need to consider, the startup phase, you need to consider the initial clients. So this is what you're going to do with your clients, who they're going to be, and really how you're going to engage with clients. And this is something that's vitally important and something that also we see a lot of business owners get wrong because they're trying to cut costs or save time. So the main things that we're talking about here are who are your clients, setting up terms and conditions, and also you need to consider some debt collection procedures to make sure that you're paid for the work that you do. So who are your clients? So what we're talking about here is working out who your ideal client is. So, and the reason that this is so important is that you don't want to have a scattergun approach to your marketing to get new clients. And by scattergun, I mean that you just try all different things without any actual idea about where you're going to find these clients. So working out who your ideal client is critical so that you know where to target your marketing to. Key questions to think about at this phase are, how old are your ideal clients? How much property do they own? Where do they live? What car do they drive? What are their hobbies? What customers and clients are they looking at for their business? And all of that will give you an idea about what you actually need to consider for your ideal client so that you consider where you actually market to your business. You also need to be careful at this phase of not having a one major client or a government department that gives you all of your work. If you do that, you're taking a serious risk in the business, because if that contract fails or the government department leaves, you're doing their work, then you lose your business. So you really need to think seriously about who that client is. We've seen many clients over the years who buy a business or they start up a new business and they have this great contract with the government department, and then the government changes and they say, no, we want to go and do work with someone else, and they lose that work. The next thing to think about in this phase are the terms of trade. So this is really important, something that most people get wrong, especially early on in the business. It's important to ensure that you and your client's expectations are properly defined, and having a proper agreement will ensure that they're actually properly defined. Defining the scope of what you're doing is also critical. The amount of people that we see come to us where they think that they've performed all the services for the client, and the client says, no, you haven't done that. I expected you to do X, Y, and Z, is remarkable. And that can so easily be fixed by properly defining what you're doing at the beginning and everyone agreeing to that at the beginning. You also need to define the consequences of default. So, if you don't perform or the other side doesn't perform, then it's critical that you know what the consequences of that are. Otherwise, the attitude of "she'll be right, mate" just will not last. And one of the reasons that people give for not doing this at this stage of the business is time and money. They say, look, I don't have the time to set up terms of trade, and I don't have the time to set up procedures properly. And that's a real failing that people have, because what happens, and anyone in business will know this, that you start off in business, you don't set up things properly, and then you spend months and weeks trying to fix all those problems later on, and you just constantly don't have time to actually fix those problems. So it's really important to do that at this stage of the business. The last thing to think about in this phase is debt collection process. So anyone in business will know that cash is king, and it's very important to make sure that you get paid for the work that you do. And having the proper procedure in place to make sure that you get paid is so critically important. So whether that's just following up clients, if you have a 14-day account, following them up, on the 15th day just to say, hey, listen, why haven't you paid my bill? Having some sort of payment plan or process to follow up clients will ensure that you don't suffer from cash flow problems, because people will pay you. The other issue too, is, and a lot of people say, oh, look, I don't have time for this, I don't have time to be chasing up bills. If you're going to have a client or a customer who you're going to do a lot of business with, you also want to set their expectations so that they don't think that they can just not pay you for months on end. Otherwise, if you do that at the beginning, then you really suffer for that in the future. So getting a debt collection process, and as I say, it can be as simple as just following up emails and old telephone calls on a regular basis to make sure that you get paid, is really important for the beginning of a business, to make sure that you don't suffer from what so many startup businesses suffer from, and that is not having enough cash to pay for what they need to do in business. So the next phase is bringing on employees, phase 4. And so this is where you've got some clients and you start to have a scalable business, and you need to have some employees to start doing some work for you. So the main things to consider here are the status of your employees versus contractors, having proper employment agreements in place, and also having employment policies, which I'll talk about later. You'll notice that we've put the bringing on employees at the top of the dip, the first dip of the life cycle. And this is because it's important to remember that in any business, in any life cycle, there are pluses and minuses. It's a cyclical process where things are going to go right and things are going to go wrong. When you start to bring on employees, more often than not, it's not that things are going to go wrong, but the business will suffer, your time will suffer, because you're there training employees to make sure that they get things done correctly. And that's fine, that's normal in any business. It's normal that businesses will face this, but it's important to remember that if you want to build a good scalable business into the future, then bringing on employees is critical, and it's critical to do it right for the reasons I'll go through. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the employee versus contractor relationship. This is a very important distinction to get right from the beginning because there are tax and other implications that vary between employees and contractors. Importantly, in Australia anyway, if you're an employee, the employer is liable for the work that you do. So it's important to make sure that you work out what the people are so that you're not having fights with your employees or contractors later on. The name of what you call the people doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you call them a contractor. If they're actually an employee, then that will be, they'll be found to be an employee. So an employee is generally someone who works for your business, usually exclusively, and that you're responsible for the work that they do. A contractor is someone who can move around. So the classic contractors in the building industry, they might do a little bit of work for one builder, a little bit of work for another builder, but they've got the freedom to move around. And one of the big problems we see is people who try to change contractors back to employees. It doesn't work because there's tax and superannuation implications that mean that if you move a contractor back to an employee, then they're paid, in their eyes, they're paid less. And that's a real problem for people who try to fix this problem after they've got a business that's further along the life cycle. They really need to get it right when they start bringing on employees. Like having terms of trade, having an employment agreement properly drafted is very, very important for any business owner. Generic agreements can be dangerous because individual circumstances for each employee or contractor will change, and you need to really tailor them to make sure they're done right. Spending the money to get them done right early on can save a lot of hassles and money into the future. They also need to define properly the expectations of the employer and the employee or contractor so that there's no argument over what the person's responsibilities are, and all the expectations are set right up front when the relationship starts. The last thing to consider in phase 4, bringing on employees, is employee policies. Now these are very, very important, but so few businesses actually have them. And what they do is they define the relationship and expectations at the workplace and cover things like dress standards and codes, drug and alcohol use, workplace bullying, harassment procedures, grievance procedures, email and internet use policies, and guidelines for staff members' use of social media, networking and blogging. Now, why these are important are they set some ground rules for your employees. They tell employees what they need to do in certain circumstances and how they deal with problems. So grievance procedures. If they don't know how to deal with a problem, then often it'll fester and nothing will ever come of it. Whereas if you've got a procedure in place, then people know, okay, I know who to come to, I know what to do, I know what procedure to follow to get my grievance sorted out. So employee policies are critically important, and it's a really good idea to get them early on in business so that you're not trying to introduce them later on and causing problems. We know from experience that if you have a client who doesn't have employee policies and they try to introduce them, it can cause significant friction with employees. So doing it early on in the business legal life cycle is really important to make sure that those expectations are set properly going into the future. The next phase of the life cycle is protecting intellectual property. So a lot of advisors might disagree with us on the placement of this phase, because this is all about protecting the intellectual property of the business. But as I said earlier, the business legal life cycle is all about setting some realistic expectations about when things can be done. And whilst it would be great for people to set up and protect their intellectual property at the beginning of a business, the conception startup phase, that very rarely happens, but it needs to happen at this stage of the business. So once you've got brought on some employees, got some clients, and you've got a business that's actually starting to be worth something, protecting your intellectual property is critical. And it's really about putting the procedures and policies in place for your business to ensure that the intellectual property is protected so that you can really traverse your way through the next steps of the business legal life cycle without any real issues on this in relation to this. So here we're really talking about trademarks, patents, how-to guides, and also licensing agreements. So a trademark, every business has a trademark. A trademark is the name, logo or symbol that identifies your business, product or service, and it's got to be unique. So it's the unique thing that people go, oh, I know that business, so Streten Mason Lawyers, I know Streten Mason Lawyers because of that name. You can register, and you should register your trademark through IP Australia as a registered trademark so that you're protected and no one else can use that trademark. You can also protect it internationally if your product, business or service is going to go internationally. When you protect a trademark, you protect it in a certain number of classes. So there's something like 45 classes of products, goods or services, and you need to protect your trademark in those products or services to make sure that it's protected for what you're actually doing. And there are fees associated with those. Licensing arrangements. So what we're talking about here is having a separate legal entity that owns your intellectual property. So if you have you can set up a separate entity that will own the intellectual property and then license the use of that intellectual property to third parties. So you can set this up, and that can be set up in the earlier phases of the business legal lifecycle, but what we've found is it never really is. People just don't have the time or money to do so. But doing it at this stage will really help protect the business and the intellectual property moving into the future. The next thing to talk about are patents. So a patent is again, it's like a trademark. It's registered with the government, and it protects an invention to allow the owner to exploit that invention to third parties. They're complicated applications, but if you've got an invention which is unique, then you really need to think about patenting that invention, and doing it at this stage will really help to protect the business going into the future. Probably the one thing that's missed most of all in this phase of business and in any business is how-to guides. So what I'm referring to here is the knowledge of how to do the work in your business. So often that's in the business owner's head or the employee's head, and documenting that is critically important, especially in this phase of the business, to make sure that if something happens to the business owner or one of the employees, that there's a set procedure, a checklist, a flow chart, a step-by-step guide of how you do the work in your business. Doing it at this point, will ensure that you can really set your business up properly for the preceding phases of the business legal lifecycle. And it's also good to do it at this phase because when you bring on employees, you want them to help generate the content for those how-to guides. It's no good for us business owners to build up a business and build these how-to guides on how to do things without actually doing the right, without having the right things in place to begin with. So if you do it with your employees, you'll make sure that it's actually useful for them. The next phase of the business legal lifecycle is maximising your business and bringing in investors. So here we're talking about consolidating your business so that it's to ensure that it's a well-oiled machine. And you'll see that it's at the bottom of the dip, and that's because really at this phase you're really launching yourself off to go through the preceding phases of the business legal lifecycle in a lot of detail. So really what we've found is that maximising your business or bringing in investors is something that people really choose between the two of them. You can do both. A lot of people don't want to bring in investors into the business for obvious reasons. They want to maintain their business for themselves, and they don't want to bring people. But if you're not going to bring in investors, then maximising your business is really, really critical at this stage of business. So when we're talking about maximising your business, what are we talking about? We're talking about looking to fully utilise your staff, referral sources, and advertising to make sure that you're getting the best out of them, that they're bringing in the most amount of money for your business, and that they're really doing the right thing for your business. You need to think about what are your business's strengths so that you can exploit them. You need to think about your business's weaknesses so that you can try and plug those holes to prevent problems from occurring. You really need, and at this phase it's really important to ensure that all the preceding phases are dealt with properly, because if you don't do it at this stage, if all the previous phases of the business legal lifecycle haven't been fully gone through, it will really be shown at this phase because problems will magnify themselves. When you bring in investors, you really need to think about the person that you're bringing in. So often we see people who bring in investors. They might be a family member, they might be a friend or even a bank, you really need to make sure that you know who you bring in and set those expectations about what they're going to be doing in the business early on. So often we see people bring in a third party to a business, whether it be a family member, an investor, or a bank, and they haven't set the expectations of what they actually want to do in that business, and it falls apart. The amount of, especially family members that we see that invest in businesses that it simply fails on is remarkable. And people, and if people had that conversation early on, then especially at this phase of the business legal life cycle, then they wouldn't suffer from these problems because people's expectations would be set properly early on. The next phase of the business legal life cycle is expansion, franchising, and licensing. Now, this is when you consider expanding your business. So you've maximized your current business and you need to think about, okay, now I want to expand it. So really it's a choice between the three. Some people do, maybe do two out of these three, but usually it's a choice between expansion, franchising, or licensing. So here you might consider opening a new shop or premises for your business. You might consider franchising your business model, or you might consider licensing your intellectual property for third parties to use. So I know I've been harping on about this, but it's so critically important to realize that when you get to this phase, if you're going to do this, you have to have everything set up correctly. All of the preceding phases have to be set up properly, because if you don't have things set up properly in the business, then the problems will magnify through this phase of the business legal life cycle. So what I'm talking about here is if you open up a new premises, and that premises is going to be set up the same as your previous premises, then you're really going to suffer in the business because your problems will expand into that new premises. So when you're talking about expansion, really you need to ensure that any technology in your business and the fit out of your premises are consistent and are what you want for the market that you're going into. It's really critical that you do that as part of the business and make sure that's all right to begin with. You also need to think about the hard running costs of opening up a new business premises. So here we're talking about rent, we're talking about outgoings, we're talking about other costs, electricity, those kind of costs that will mean that you'll have to pay those costs and to make sure that you can afford those in your business. Because if you can't afford those in your business, then there's no point of expanding because all you're going to do is just really suffer in business. So the second option in this phase is franchising. So for people who don't know what a franchise is, essentially it's a specialist business structure that operates under a franchisor's trademark or style of business. So here we're talking about the classic one, McDonald's, and it's really critical to make sure that your systems are in place, because when you sell a franchise, you're selling your business system and you're selling your intellectual property to third parties. What I always say to people who come to me to set up a franchise is that you have to have a really good manual set up, and you need to think about, if you were to come into this business today, what would you need to make sure that you could operate it? Because we all know how to operate our businesses, we all know how to do what we do, but you need to consider, if someone with no idea on how to operate your business came into it, how would they do that? And that's really critical to make sure that you have right in this phase. It's often the case when people come to see us with franchising that they're usually about a year or so behind when they can actually franchise because they don't have everything set up properly. But if you do follow the business legal life cycle, then usually you'll be able to have that all set up properly. Here you can also license your intellectual property. So a lot of times people don't want to set up a franchise and they just want to license their brand to a third party to operate under their name. But licensing intellectual property is very dangerous because it can be seen as a franchise, and you need to be really careful and get the right advice to make sure that when you license your intellectual property that's done properly. Another way that people can use to expand their business during this phase is to buy a new business. Now, doing this properly can really help to expand a business. So say if you're a real estate agency, you buy a rent roll. You can really use that successfully to build a business and build a client base. However, you really need to be careful that the price justifies the extra income stream. So you need to get the right advice from the right consultants to make sure that what you're buying is actually value for money and will mean that you'll be able to operate your business going into the future. And you also need to be really careful at this point of the business that what you're buying can be integrated into your current business. So ensuring that the systems and the policies and procedures of the business that you're buying are properly set up will ensure that you'll be able to use this phase of the life cycle to really expand your business and expand into a really good business. The next phase is estate planning. Now, most people don't like thinking about what's going to happen to them when they die or if they become disabled. And like a lot of the other phases, this is something that you can think about earlier, but if you haven't thought about it by this stage of your business, you really need to think about it now. And the reason for that is that you've got a good business that's now becoming to be worth something. You've got, hopefully you've got some employees, you've maximised your business. You really need to make sure that your business is protected from third parties and from things happening that you don't want to happen when you die. A lot of people would be surprised by the laws that allow what happens when people die and where their assets go. Often they think it goes to a husband and wife, and if you've got children, then that can change. So, and there's different rules all over the world and all different jurisdictions, but making sure that you've got a will ensure that where you want your estate to go is where it goes. So the things to consider during this phase are wills, obviously, testamentary trusts, power of attorneys, advanced health directives, personal insurances, and also buy-sell option agreements. And it's really important too that you get the right document, estate plan document drafted for your circumstances. You can go down to the post office and buy a will kit, and really, if that's not done correctly, that can really cause a lot of problems. So getting the right advice and making sure that your will's done properly is really, really critical. So what is a will? A will is a document that sets out the intentions of what will happen with your estate when you die. It's really simple. It overrides the law. It says that if you say that your money is to go to X, Y, and Z, then that's where your money and assets go. And it's very important that you have a proper will to make sure that your legacy goes with where your wishes are. A testamentary trust, you might have heard of this term before. It's a trust that's set up upon the death of the person. And what it does is it protects the beneficiaries. And it's great for asset protection of kids. So if you've got kids who you're worried that might be sued or might have a claim against them for some reason, then a testamentary trust can help protect those assets from being attacked by third parties. A power of attorney is also a critical document, and it's a document that gives a person the power to make decisions, both personal and financial, on your behalf in certain circumstances. So the classic example is a husband and wife give each other power of attorney, and where they do that, they can make decisions on each other's behalf. Now, it's really critical that to know that this is a power of attorney ceases when you die and a will takes over. A lot of people think, oh, I've got power of attorney over someone, and that person dies, and they think that they can handle their estate. That can't happen. It's got to be while the person's still alive. The next document to consider during this phase is an advanced health directive, and that's a document that tells doctors what you want done in various medical issues. So there's a bunch of different questions that they go through, and you sit down with a doctor and they explain to you what that ailment will be, or what that condition means, and what state you'll be in, and you say what you want to happen to yourself at that point in time. And that can be a really critical document because a lot of people don't like making decisions on medical matters for their loved ones. They hate making that decision, and if they've got a document that tells them what to do, then that can really save a lot of problems going into the future. The next thing to think about here are personal insurances. So here we're talking about life and total and permanent disability insurance, and making sure that if you die, that there's some sort of insurance in place to pay your family or your estate some money so that they're not out of pocket depending on how much money you've got in your estate. They really need to be set up properly, as if they're not, then you can have massive tax implications on when the money comes through, and getting the right advice, especially from a qualified financial planner, is critical during this phase. Going in with personal insurances are buy-sell option agreements. So if you're in business with a business partner, you need to consider a buy-sell option agreement. And basically what this does is it triggers the sale of a business or the shares in a company or a business in the event of death or disablement of a party. And why this is critical is that often in business, a person does not want to be in business with their business partner's family if that person dies or is disabled. If someone dies, then normally the part of the business that they own will go to their family, and then they'll be able to come into the business. As I say, having a buy-sell option agreement can mean that things are properly dealt with and properly set up so that that doesn't occur. So the next phase of the life cycle is investing in property. So this is where you've got a good business that's earning good income and you want to do something with that money. And investing in property is a great way to build a portfolio to provide for income upon retirement when you retire from your business. Now, investing in property isn't exclusively property. It can be investing in shares. But in the business legal life cycle, we talk about investing in property because that's where us lawyers get involved, and we don't really get involved in the purchase of shares through the stock market. But investing in property, that's where we can help out people. Now, there's many different types of properties that you can buy. You can buy your own home. You can buy a residential, commercial, or industrial investment property, or you can buy a strata title units or townhouses. It's really important to get that advice on how to do that properly early on. Talk to your accountants, talk to your financial planners, talk to your lawyers to make sure that the way that you structure the investment in property sets you up properly for the future, because you want to make sure that what you're actually investing in is what you want to invest in and what will actually make you some money. You can also, in this phase, look at investing in a property to actually operate your business from. So a lot of people will buy the business premises and operate their business from that premises, and that way they're not paying rent. So that's a great thing to do at this phase of the business legal life cycle. The next phase is litigation, and so what we're talking about here isn't really debt collection. We're talking about the litigation that invariably pops up with any successful business. Most disputes never go to court. It's some minute percentage of disputes ever actually go to court. But dealing with it at this phase is basically inevitable in any business, because someone will do something wrong by you, or someone will think that they're entitled to something that you've got, and you'll have to get into litigation. So you'll see also this is also dispute resolution on the life cycle, and that's because you can, at this, we don't want to see things go to litigation. We want to see things resolve themselves without going through that costly process. But you really need to consider protecting your rights at this phase, the cost versus benefit analysis of actually going through the litigation dispute resolution process, and also can you mediate a solution. What we often see too is when people get into this side of the this phase of the life cycle, that we're also talking about defending actions. So people suing them for things that may rightly or wrongly pop up in business, and really that occurs at this phase. And getting the right advice, talking to lawyers, talking to other consultants is really critical to make sure that you deal with the phase properly and you deal with these problems at this phase. The next phase of the life cycle is the sale of the whole or part of the business, or even listing the business on a stock exchange. And you'll notice that this is at the peak of the business. And the reason for this is that when you've got a really good sustainable business, then that's when you want to sell it. You want to sell it when it's at the peak of its powers, because that's when you're going to get the highest price for your business. When you're bringing the most amount of income and you've got the most systems set up, people are going to be interested in buying your business from you. So this is when you need to start to talk to a business broker, and you really need to make sure that the business is set up properly. Now, what we've found, and dealing with a lot of businesses that are for sale, is that if they've got everything set up and they've followed the life cycle properly, then they can really look at selling their business well at this point. If they don't, then usually it's a year or two process to get right to this phase. Now, it's important to remember that anything could happen in business that might mean that you want to leave the business or sell the business. If that occurs, then having everything set up beforehand is really critically important. So that's one of the other reasons why we've started the business legal lifecycle, is to explain these, what needs to be set up properly to make sure that the business is going to be successful. It's also critical at this point, and I did say it at the conception phase, to really consider whether or not you want the business to be a lifestyle business or whether or not you want something to sell and to someone else. So it's a really exciting phase, this one, because it's really the culmination of all the effort that you've put into the business to make sure that it can be sold. And so here, some of the critical things, and you really do need to consult with accountants, financial planners, and business brokers, is what's the price that you want for the business? What is the property? What's the market that you want to sell the business to? Who are those people? How are you going to contact them? How are you going to market to them? And it's really critical to do that properly at this stage to make sure that you get the right price. So as I said before, and as is on the life cycle itself, you can also list the business on a stock exchange, and it's really critical to make sure that everything's set up properly at this point, because if it's not, then you're really going to struggle to sell the idea about listing on a stock exchange. When someone buys the business, or whether it be whole or part of the business, or even when it's listed on the stock exchange, the person really is starting the business all over again, going back to the conception phase. And the reason for that is that everyone's journey through a business is unique, and if they set up everything properly, then they'll be able to go quickly through the early phases, but they really need to ensure that when they start a new business, when they buy a new business and start in that business, that everything's done properly all the way through, and they're comfortable with the way that the life cycle of the business has occurred from a legal aspect. The next phase is retirement. So this is generally after the business has been sold, or it could also be if you've decided to do an earn out from the business. So you really need, by this phase, to ensure that you can actually live whilst you're retired. The amount of people that retire and they go, oh, I don't know where I'm going to get my money from to eat and to do this and to do that, is remarkable. And so making sure that you've set up everything properly beforehand during the life cycle will mean that you'll know what's going to happen when you retire. You need to think about things like superannuation, self-managed super funds, and what money that's going to pay out to you into the future so that you can retire. You can also retire as part of a buyout. So often when people buy a business, they'll retire and after a certain buyout period, and so that can also happen here. And really, retirement usually happens after the business has hit its peak, and you're thinking about, okay, well, what am I going to do with myself for the rest of my life? The last phase is insolvency and winding up. Now, we all hope that this doesn't happen in any business, especially early on in the business. So what we've found is businesses who haven't gone through the business legal life cycle properly have really failed and gone to this phase much sooner than they really should have. It can also be a positive thing. So if you sell a business and you might sell off the assets of that business, and then you want to wind up that company to go and do something else. So it's not necessarily a negative thing, but it can be. And also, if it's managed properly and you get the right advice from, again, lawyers, accountants, financial planners, even insolvency professionals, it can be managed properly to make sure that it's not a massive issue for you going forward. So what does insolvency mean? So basically, in a nutshell, insolvency means you can't pay your bills when they're due and owing. So you've got all these bills that are piling up and you can't pay those bills. Winding up, what we're referring to here is you've got a company that becomes insolvent and it has its affairs wound down. The other thing to consider here is bankruptcy. And so this is a personal thing. So this is where you haven't been able to pay all your debts. And basically, when you're bankrupted, all of your affairs, all of your debts, except for some like government fines and things like child support payments, are compromised, and you start afresh. You're generally bankrupted for 3 years, so long as you provide all the information that's required, and then you can start afresh. But it's always a black mark in your name. But as I say, managing this phase properly can really help a business and ensure that the right things happen, and so that if you do want to continue in business after the insolvency winding up phase, that you can, because you're properly set up going into the future. All right, everyone, so that's a brief summary of the business legal life cycle. There's obviously a lot to it. There's obviously a lot of different aspects to think about as you're going through the different phases. Understanding the life cycle is critical for any business, whether it be someone who's been in business for 6 months, whether they're just looking at starting up a business or if they've been in business for 35 years. So it's really important to understand this and go through the life cycle properly to make sure that you do things properly and that you can really grow a business. It's also important to understand that any business will face tough times. You're always going to face challenges. It's how you deal with those challenges that is important. And knowing the business legal life cycle, we believe will help business owners really get through those tough times properly. So does anyone have any questions? Please feel free to put the questions into the GoToWebinar format, and I can answer those. So one question I've got here is, if you miss something in the initial client phase, like agreements with your clients, is it too late, and how hard is it to go back? Look, it's never too late to go back and fix those problems. It just means that you've got to have that conversation with your clients to make sure that you're setting up your business properly and that you negotiate with them to make sure that they're happy to accept those agreements at that phase. So no, any of this stuff can be done later. What we've found though is it's better to do it early on rather than leaving it to the late. Another question we've got is there any benefit from a liability perspective for my business that would benefit from me implementing workplace policies? And the answer to that is yes. So where an incident occurs that may be investigated by Fair Work Australia for such things as bullying, harassment, or workplace health and safety, if you have properly documented employee policies, then that can really help to minimise your penalties, because you can show Fair Work Australia that what you've done properly, and everything that you've done is correct. So I've got another question here. I'm entering into a new business with a partner. So we're at phase 2. We haven't really discussed phase 11. Can you provide some preliminary things to discuss with my partner prior to coming to see you? Look, really critical at that point is to think about where you want to go in business. So thinking about what you want out of the business is really, really critical, and making sure that you've talked about it with your business partner is something that you really need to do. If you don't do it early on, you can find, what we've found is that people go through business, they think everything's going well, and then everything falls apart when they start realizing, hey, listen, my expectations aren't met. It's like a marriage. When you enter into a marriage, you have certain expectations, you have certain thoughts, you have certain, where you want things to go. If you haven't had those discussions before you go into marriage, then that fails. And it's the same in business. So is there any more questions? I've got one other question here. Why is it important to perform protecting intellectual property at the start of the business life cycle? Is there any danger of leaving it later on? Well, yes, there is. And the big danger is someone else steals your brand and you can't protect it later on. Or, God forbid, something happens to you and you haven't set up your systems and procedures properly, and then something happens to you, you get sick, or there's a family crisis, and all of a sudden you're not in the business. So protecting your intellectual property early on is critical for any business. Well, look, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I hope you found this informative. There's going to be more. This is just the launch of the Business Legal Lifecycle. Streten Mason Lawyers are going to be doing a lot of presentations on this topic. We're going to be doing a lot of work on this because we think it's something that's really advantageous for businesses. So if you're interested, please let us know. Please follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and make sure that you can do what you need to do to get your business going well into the future. Thanks very much for attending.